Thank you for coming out for what promises to be a very interesting and scintillating evening discussion between Hassan Elahi and Kalup Linzy. This evening's lecture is part of a very exciting and robust series of programs associated with the exhibition 30 Americans. Generous support for tonight was provided by American Express for the artist lecture series associated with 30 Americans. I'd also like to thank our advisory committee for all of their hard work in establishing and developing these programs. And in particular, I'd like to thank individual members of the advisory committee who gave for tonight's lecture, so that tonight's lecture would be free of charge. They include Floyd Coleman, Julian Four, Beverly Sauer, Mr. and Mrs. Harry Hopper III, Dr. Herman Milligan, and Dr. Constance Milligan, Joff Masakawa, Judy Norell, Dr. Michael Pollack, and myself. So I give a big round of applause to those folks. For more information on 30 Americans and the related programs, please go to our website, www.corcoran.org/30Americans. And before we get into the substance of the evening, I just want to mention that the organization and sequence of programming is going to be a little bit unusual, so work with us. There will be a mic at some point so that you can ask questions, so please use the microphone. I would now like to introduce our speakers. Hassan Elahi is an interdisciplinary artist whose work examines issues of surveillance, simulated time, transport systems, borders, and frontiers. His work has been presented in numerous exhibitions at venues such as Site Santa Fe, Centre Pompidou, Sundance Film Festival, Castle Culture Branoff, the Hermitage, and in the Venice Biennale. Elahi was recently invited to speak about his work at the Tate Modern, the Einstein Forum, the American Association of Artificial Intelligence, and at TED Global. His awards include grants from the Creative Capital Foundation, a Ford Foundation Philip Morris National Fellowship, and an artist grant from the Association Artitech. Forgive me, I'm not going to get this one right. In San Sebastian, Spain. His work is frequently in the media and has been covered by the New York Times, Forbes, Wired, CNN, ABC, CBS, NPR, Al Jazeera, and Fox. And he has appeared on the Colbert Report. He is currently an associate professor of art at the University of Maryland, where he is the director of digital cultures and creativity in the Honors College. He was a 2010 Alfred McDowell Fellow, and in 2009 he was a resident faculty endowed chair at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. From 1999 to 2004, Elahi was an assistant professor at the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida. And one of my favorite things, or intriguing pieces of information about Hassan, is that he is the principal subject in a book by a preeminent physicist, Laszlo Badarbashi. The book is called Burst. It's about the hidden patterns behind everything human beings do. And in this book, Hassan appears over and over as the quintessential example of an unpredictable human being. So that's just our interviewer tonight, folks. The guest of honor, the artist, Kalup Linzy, is an American video and performance artist who lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. Born in Clermont, Florida, Linzy graduated from the MFA program at the University of South Florida in 2003. He also attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture Video Art Workshop, and in 2005, he received a grant from the Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation. Linzy was named a Guggenheim Fellow in 2007. On July 13th, 2010, with an invitation from James Franco, he made his debut appearance on the daytime television soap opera General Hospital. Linzy's work has been reviewed in the New York Times, Art in America, and Art Forum. And I'll let Kalup tell you a little bit more about what he's up to these days. And now I turn it over to our speakers. Thanks.
Thank you, Henry. Can you folks hear us okay back there? Okay, please, can you hear me? Okay.
Testing. Oh, sorry.
So thanks
delayed.
thanks for coming out, folks, and thanks for sticking around. We're running just a tad bit behind, but we're going to get some really fun stuff tonight. Caleb and I were just talking on the drive over here, and then also sitting around. And this is really the first time in almost 10 years we're going to be talking about art. So this is going to be pretty interesting. So I think looking back at the work, and I think a really important part of understanding your work is understanding where you come from, and looking at, I know we mentioned Claremont, but I guess that's because that's like the nearest big city. So
yeah,
maybe
that's where the hospital.
That's where the hospital is. Okay, so maybe we should talk about Stuckey, because that's where you're really from.
Yeah.
So can you give us a sense of Stuckey?
Yes, Stuckey is a small town in Florida between Orlando and Tampa, and it's more of a settlement. My great-grandmother and great-grandfather migrated from South Carolina to work there at a turpentine still. And the guy who owned the still, I think his last name was Stuckey, and so they call it Stuckey Still.
Yeah.
And this was in 1898.
Yeah, it's, I think one of my first time I went to Stuckey, you had the Stuckey Community Festival. And this is a parade that you and your cousin decided to
A friend and another cousin took over.
Yeah.
And we founded it in 1998 to mark our small town turning 100. And so it was a parade where we had like trucks and trailers and street vendors, mostly family and friends, like selling food on the street. And it's grown, and now it probably attracts like over 2,000 people.
Really? Wow. Because that's like got to be at least 10 times the number of people that live there.
Yeah.
Maybe even like 20 times that.
Yeah, because it's a small town, maybe like between 200 to 300 people.
Yeah.
It was more people way back in the day.
Yeah.
But now I go, and everyone tends to live in the towns surrounding the area, and just come there to go to church on Sundays.
So I think one of the things is, and so I think growing up in this town of 200 to 300 people, and half of them I would assume would be your relatives. What did you see? I mean, what was it like growing up there?
Pretty much, when I was a small kid, I remember it being like a lot of dirt roads. We would all sort of like play together. So like my cousins, we're more like sisters and brothers because we were all like really, really, really close. And I just remember when they started paving the roads, it was like the most exciting thing because we were getting pavement. And this was like, I was born in 77, so this was like early 80s. But I also remember a transition happening where like my mother, they experienced like people in the neighborhood having their own businesses. And so like a lot of that was ending. Like we even had like a gas station in Stuckey back in the day. But what we saw was the gas station didn't work anymore, so we played, with the material left over. I think
I have some photos of that gas station there.
Yeah,
from one of the community festivals.
Yeah.
At Maxwell Loop and Stuckey Road.
Yeah. And so like a lot of, so we knew based on what they were saying, like things was sort of had changed. And so they say we didn't use our imaginations as much as they did because they were like, we used to canoe and all you all do is like, nothing or too much.
Yeah.
And even now, like the kids don't even play. So, but then the crack epidemic happened.
Yeah.
So then we saw like a lot of people who were going to work and just going to work and stuff, and next thing you know, they were strung out on drugs. So that changed the face of the neighborhood. So it went from like a self-produced town to like crackheads and people who were really in the church and saved.
Wow. So, I mean, I think one of the things that we talked about this, I guess, a long time ago.
Well, not just, it was some in between, but I don't want to, make the town sound bad, but we saw like extremes.
Yeah.
I mean, like right before our eyes.
Yeah, well, and it was, I mean, the first time I went to this town, it was just absolutely incredible for me because I'd never actually been to a town that small. And coming in and seeing this community. And I think that's really important because I think that really affects your work and to have that lens on the work. So I want to go back to, well, let's see what else was going on. I mean, so you had these kids playing on the paved road, but I mean, the TV was a very important part.
The TV was very important. My great grandmother listened to the Guiding Light on the radio, her and a great aunt. And they followed the transition from Guiding Light on the radio to television. And my grandmother also watched it, and my aunt and uncles. And my grandmother lost her hearing at a young age. And I was raised by my grandmother because my mother was one of the people on crack. And so even when we played, soap operas were on like all the TVs in the neighborhood. So even when we went from house to house and we played with each other, I mean, the TVs were always on soap operas. And I remember my older cousins, they would get into them, and I got into them as well, but they sort of stayed with me in a way that they didn't stay with them. Like, they sort of kind of like moved on. But I always continued to watch, even until this day. So it was just something that was around, and I was also fascinated that because my grandmother, she was deaf, and she would watch them every day. She would watch The Price is Right, Donahue, and the CBS soap operas. And so I just got into them.
Yeah. You know, we first met, I think it was maybe 2000. And I remember the day very vividly because I don't even remember if it was my office or in the classroom, but you came up to me and said, somebody said I should talk to you about going to graduate school. And I was like, who are you? And
I think Diane sent me to your...
And the funny thing is, like, you'd already been in that school for years, but and I'd never seen you there, and I was like,
because I was in the film program. I was in art, but we were doing film studies, and they phased out the film program to bring these people in. And so I spent my last year just taking courses to graduate. And so that's why you didn't know me, because I wasn't really in the department. I was like off taking other classes, and I might have had like one or two classes.
Well, the one thing I remember very clearly was that, you know, I remember you showed me a few really early videos of your grandmother at some family cookout. And I was thinking, well, where are you doing these? And I remember you saying, well, I go back to my old high school. And I was like, well, that's, you know, well, where's your high school? And you mentioned, I was like, well, that doesn't seem relatively anywhere nearby. And that seemed for me this incredible amount of time and energy just to go and edit a few bits and pieces of these videos. So I was fascinated by someone's desire to make this work, and completely just being resourceful and saying, oh, okay, I got this here in this city, I got this in this city, I got this in that city, and I'm just going to put it all together. And I mean, I'm saying cities, but, you know, we're talking about towns of hundreds here.
My hometown was an hour and 15 minutes away from USF. And so the last year, because I wasn't taking any classes, I didn't have access to the equipment. And the librarian, my high school librarian, I didn't actually take her as a teacher. She wasn't my teacher, but she took me in after school one day because I wanted to when I was in high school, and taught me how to edit. And so from high school all the way through college, she would let me go to the high school and edit videos that I was working on. Now, I was also student body president when I was in high school, so I kept those relationships, and they let me use their equipment like all through high school and college. And I didn't even take the classes. I was just taught on the side. We should probably see this video. And she just retired last May, and then she surprised me. She wanted me to come talk to her class. And so she surprised me with the first soap opera.
It's one of the YouTube videos. So let's
go 2 minutes.
Let's go to Firefox, and then Kalup Linzy's first soap opera.
And this is me, my sister, and cousins, like in Stuckey, in the house, making a project for my science class, environmental science.
I think we just lost it being loaded from cache when we went to full screen. Oops.
Understand Good enough. Oh.
There's only 191 views on this?
I deleted it one
Okay.
time by accident and re-uploaded it. But you get it's me and my cousin, and we're having a conversation about science and about the environment being destroyed, and she thinks she has skin cancer, and I'm sort of like the preachy one telling her to stay out of the sun and stop polluting. And so that's pretty much how it goes. And I was like 16, and then my younger cousins were like 8 and 9. So it's an age range.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's gonna load up. But if it doesn't, you can visit YouTube later.
I guess you're like everyone else now.
And the script was in my hand, so.
What's up there?
Thinking about the ozone, how it's being destroyed.
Wow. So, let's change things up a little bit and maybe move a little forward. A lot of the work that you do, and maybe this is a way to bring Stuckey out of it, but we're talking about technology and this idea of this handheld technology, or maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I think we had a conversation a while back ago, and maybe this is going back about a dozen years, about three-way phone, about three-way conversations, about telephones, and how I guess you spend a lot of time on the phone with your, I guess would be cousins or relatives, or how did that work out?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
and I don't know why. I don't know how I arrived at using the telephone so much, because as a small kid, we didn't have a telephone. We had a telephone for like 2 or 3 months. I lived with my grandmother. She was deaf.
Oh, yeah.
So that was the first part of my childhood, so we didn't have a telephone. When I moved with my aunt and uncle, we had one, and I think I probably went through a period when I talked on the telephone, but I don't remember like being a telephone person like so much. I used the telephone, but it wasn't something I grew up with as a small child, just as a teenager.
So, but how did the phone calls go into your work? Because so many of your early works were based on the telephone and the conversations on the telephone.
I know I like a lot of comedians that did like prank calls, and then Hassan gave us an assignment in class. It was a conceptual project assignment, I should say, to talk about. It was about Labor Day weekend.
It's the first week of class.
It was the first week of class. And so I made the telephone conversations with these different characters on the telephone. And I think to keep the consistency, and because I like the crank calls or whatnot, I started creating more and more characters on the telephone.
And then that led to creating like Ride to the Club or Ramon Calls Julieta, some of the earlier videos.
And also the first critique. Remember I was working on the soap opera?
Yeah?
And I had a first critique which was horrible. And so my body of work changed from then on.
Yeah, because you were working on Winding Road at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually,
But I get it
think you should tell
confused.
people what Winding Road was.
I get it confused. It's a blur now. But I know the telephone was also a way to communicate and through dialogue, because I was into TV, and television is like a writer's medium. Like on television, they talk a lot. So I put them through the telephone. Like film is visual, and then theater is like big expressions.
Yeah.
And so because I was into television, I wrote a lot, and my characters, like, they spoke all the time. And I was making films and stuff in undergrad too, so I was going into a new stage.
It's really incredible seeing or hearing those really, really, really early telephone works, and then watching Taiwan on the phone in your recent videos, and he's kind of sitting there and having this. It always seems to be, even in your more recent works, there's always a character on the phone. And
I think at this point I'm just keeping it consistent.
Okay.
It's sort of like the iconography of my work at this point.
So I think another really important shift that I noticed in your work, I think, was when you
When they
went
should be texting.
they should be texting now. They should
but
be talking.
They're
Yeah.
a little behind in time.
A little bit.
Or on Skype.
So one of the shifts that I noticed in your work was, I think, the first time you were away from your family for an extended period when you went to Paris. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I was very close to my family. They were an hour and a half away, and I would go home every other weekend. And I remember wanting to leave, but I was like, how? Because I didn't know how I was going to exist other places without those relationships or without them being so close. And so I went to Paris, and I don't know, one day I stumbled upon like this black area with barbershops and hair salons, and I was like, oh my gosh, black people in Paris. Like somehow, and I actually called home, they were like, black people in Paris? And I was like, yeah, black people in Paris. And like, we were like, I know it sounds crazy now, but we were like, black people in Paris. And I don't know, like I had Rosalinda, one of the professors, like just shoot me walking around in this neighborhood, just like in these salons and barbershops. And then I feel like I also wasn't talking about my sexuality so much, and then I kind of like stumbled upon like it's all gay neighborhoods too. And so it was like this whole, something in my mind like triggered, but I was so engaged in trying to figure out and trying to understand like these different cultures. Like the month went by, and then I was like, oh, I can live away from my family. And so like from that point on, like a trigger just went off, and I started thinking about race internationally and like sexuality and all of that stuff, like on a global scale. And that was sort of like the intention of USF, to like create these international, like this global type of thinking. And so so the trigger went off in Paris. Like I stumbled upon this neighborhood and the other neighborhood, and then it was like, oh,
Like, wow.
yeah, I was like, wow. Yeah, it was a bigger world. And it sounds kind of, I guess it was naive, but I mean, that's what happens when you come from a small town. It's not always
Well, I mean, you know, when you're looking at Stuckey, population of 250 to Paris of who knows how many million, and I mean that was I think the largest city you'd been to at that point.
It was. It was, and I remember particularly when I was stumbled upon the gay area. I remember being like overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, like what is going on, like, because like it was like nobody cared, and, you know. So I was like, oh, so that was overwhelming, and then the other neighborhood was like, how do these people get here, like, you know, like, yeah, it was just weird. It sounds crazy now, but it was like really, it was the best summer, like, but the strangest and mind-opening.
Yeah. So it was
like,
huge. So when you came back, I mean, the work was just completely different than what you'd been working on prior to that summer. At least looking at it from the outside of your thinking process and such.
Well, I don't know if I was that deep.
Really?
Before, I mean, I think I had some deepness going on, but I don't know if I had completely.
Well, I mean, we saw it. I mean, there was definitely something we were able to see. There was a visible change.
Yeah. It was.
Yeah.
I think I was deep, but I just think it opened up.
Yeah.
I think it opened up. And when I say deep, like, I made a video about my grandmother like a month after she died, so I was able to look at old footage of her when my family wasn't able to even watch it, but I was able to sit there and look at her like a month after she died on video. Yeah. And so that's what I mean about deep. Like, I still had something in me that would confront things, but that was just my world, and then my world opened up.
Well, let's fast forward a little bit, because I think the following summer you'd made the transition going through Skowhegan,
I did.
where you'd met all these other people, and then shortly after that you moved to New York after you finished. So maybe and I think that was right around the time I think we were talking about Nollywood too. And for those folks that are not necessarily familiar, it's the Nigerian Bollywood movies. So you have these. So it's interesting how this film industry moves to this geography and moves to that geography to this geography, and you know this musical, this overly dramatic the super exaggerated roles, and so on.
I think the Nollywood thing, I think it came from me asking questions, and then we had Amanda Carlson.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's still her last name, but Amanda, she taught African art, and so she's brought in African, like Nigerian Nollywood films to kind of show me, or show us that it was this whole industry and these whole type of films that's related to the American soap opera and other soap operas cross-culturally. And then that's when I started getting information about people, migrating from Africa up to London and Paris and all these places. And I knew black people were in London, but not so much Paris, Don't ask me. And I think that was and I do think it was because of MTV Real World. They did a London version, and so that's where I was getting my information. So Amanda, she showed us these Nollywoods, and I remember thinking like, these people gathered in these small towns, and they would watch these things, and they would leave with a cliffhanger, and then people would show up 6 or 7 months later to see the next installment. And so I was like, oh, so then I sort of incorporated that into my videos, like leaving them with cliffhangers, and then people would want to see the next one.
Well, so I think in a lot of it...
and they were lo-fi too. Some were lo-fi. They were lo-fi as well.
Yeah. So in looking at these characters and this development, because I mean, your character work is pretty detailed, it's pretty in depth, and you spend a long time developing these characters. And maybe we can talk a little about that. But one of the things that I would like you to address is this long history in African American art, comedy, drama, whatever you want to call it, or various reiterations of it. Or interpretations of it, I should say, of the drag, of performing in drag, whether it be Martin Lawrence and Eddie Murphy, or whether we go back 1800s. So I mean, because in your work, I mean, we see Taiwan, you have this wig, but you have the beard, and so there's this exaggerated femininity and exaggerated masculinity at the same time. So maybe that's could be something we want to talk about.
For me, it started with wanting to be like Eddie Murphy and Martin, like with my own television show, just in my imagination. And then as the discussions went on, even went farther back to Flip Wilson, and even to Japanese kabuki, where it was all men. The women at some point weren't even allowed to be in these productions. And also one more. Then I got exposed to like some John Waters, which really him and Lyle Ashton Harris, like in terms of contemporary art. And so from there, it sort of like opened up. But I wanted to play a family of characters, and then I also decided to explore the character's sexuality and not have them all be heterosexual. And I started playing with like the homosexuality and all of that stuff in the work. And so I made Taiwan the gay younger child who was sort of like really quiet, like he didn't have a voice, and then he started to open up with his mother. But I also remember how Taiwan was always a singer. But I wasn't always incorporating the piano playing, like my own piano playing, into the character. And then I remember when I did the Paris video, I used Aretha Franklin's Holy Moses, and her song was like, you should play the songs yourself. And I was like, no, I can't play the piano that well. And so at USF, I wasn't even playing the piano and stuff with the music, but they were encouraging me to. And so as the time went by, I started to explore things not just on the surface level, but like in a deeper. But it started with like, Martin and Eddie Murphy, and then they're like, no, Flip Wilson was first, and then even went farther back to, I don't know if they cross-dressing minstrels. I don't know, but I know we started talking about Japanese kabuki and all of those sort of art forms.
This is a long lineage,
yeah,
and your work fits in a nice trajectory of all this work that comes through. I think this was also right around that time, shortly after when you moved to New York, and the transition Well, I mean, I remember, like, you know, I remember getting the call from you when you got your Tiffany Award, and you're like, yeah, you know, it's like I can get my own apartment now. Like, I mean, so you struggled when you got up there first. It wasn't an easy adjustment.
No, at Skowhegan, there were like 50 artists from New York, and then everybody else was from every other demographics.
Now, for those that are not familiar with Skowhegan, we're talking, this is an artist residency program in Maine, in the middle of nowhere in the woods. I mean, you're basically, I mean, you're not on a literal island, but you might as well be on an island, completely isolated from everyone else for 9 weeks. Yeah.
And so before I left, I sent work to the Steel Museum in Harlem, and I never got into one of their residencies program, but they started following me.
Shows there.
Yeah, well, later on they say they didn't feel like I needed to be in the program. They felt like I could go into shows and then just kind of like show and be sort of mentored in that way, because I was being mentored by Fred Wilson and Whitfield Lavelle. And I was working with them and assisting them, and they were like, you know, giving me knowledge. And I also had like other artist friends that I was hanging out with. And so it was a struggle, but a lot of people say, well, it wasn't that long, it was pretty quick. And I say, well, it felt pretty long. It was like a year and a half, it's something where I was like sleeping on couches, and then I was renting a room from somebody. And I remember I got the art residency, what is that?
Is that LMCC?
No,
it's Marie Walsh.
Marie Walshar.
Yes.
And I'll never forget this day, like never, ever, forever, ever forget this day. The subway went on strike, and I was living in Harlem, like Broadway and like 134th, and I would have to walk from there to Tribeca to the studio every day. Because I couldn't, the cab, they were charging like $100. And I was walking every day, and I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot, like, you know, and I was getting up every morning going to work, to the Mark, like 5 o'clock in the morning, receiving food. And then I would spend the early mornings working, then the evenings in the studio. And sometimes I would stay in the studio when I was off. Yeah. And I was walking one day, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm moving back to Stuckey. Like, it's no way, no way. And it was like the telephone rung. And it was the Louis Tiffany Conrad people saying I had won the grant for $20,000. And then I was like, well, I guess I can carry on at that point. But it was literally like I was walking down the street and they was striking, and I was like, what in the hell is going on? Like, I cannot deal with this. And yeah, that's, well, I'll never forget that day.
That really launched a lot of your career. I mean, you've had some,
I was able to relax a little more and get like an apartment, and then I was able to focus and make some work. And I was like, okay, well, I need to make some work and make some videos. And then I quit the job at the Mark, and I was like, I'll just figure it out. And then out of nowhere, I applied for the Guggenheim, and then they gave me a Guggenheim like before the Tiffany ran out.
Yeah, and that's, I mean,
so,
yeah.
And
that was right around that time. You also got the Creative Capital grant for
I did. I was on the road, and I got a Jerome. They was just like
you were living it up.
Yeah, I'm like, no, okay. Like, who do I go to? Well, so if you get a lot quick, then you know you will have to become resourceful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so. And I guess that was right around the time you were also working on Keys to the Heart and on Prospect One.
Yeah, I got into Prospect One and went down to New Orleans and shot this video on location and did a performance, and that was pretty cool.
We should see a little of that. Can we pull up that video, please? It's the Keys video. Let's minimize this window, and let's pull up the Keys clip.
And this is all my voice, and we're lip syncing to my voice, except the song.
What do you want? Shouldn't you be somewhere causing someone pain and grief?
Not today. I wanted to do something positive.
Positive. Lily does something positive. Put that on the front page of the newspaper.
Funny, funny, funny.
Why are you really here?
To tell you why Dinah is the way she is.
Enlighten me, please.
Don't worry, I will. When dealing with a woman like Dinah and myself, you can't give us all the things we really desire. We need to be challenged. Don't treat us like queens. Treat us like shit and we'll love you. We're wounded, John Jay. Save the romantic shit for girls like Sally Sue.
Are you serious?
Trust me. If you can't be an asshole to her, I suggest you leave her and find a good girl. Dinah will never love you if things stay the way they are.
I'm not a jerk, Lily.
Well, break up with her. I know her better than anyone.
I don't believe what I'm hearing.
Think about Dinah and how simple she acts. Think about how you always go out of your way to help her, to console her, to keep her safe. And what does she do?
She.
Exactly. Break up with her.
Are you sure, John Jay? Regardless of what her short...
Hold up the video, yeah. So I think, yeah, this is one of the things that when I first heard about your work in Prospect One, because most of the artists were working site specific, and I said, well, Caleb doesn't work site specific. So how does that work?
Oh yeah.
But then but using New Orleans, using the city as the site for the work. So that was really amazing hearing that.
Yeah, in this place right here, we shot on location and also did a performance in Sweet Lorraine's, where people came in for 2 shows and watched me perform live as Taiwan with the jazz musicians from New Orleans. But also with this, because a lot of the work in my language is suggestive and dirty, but the words have meaning. When we were shooting this, we actually got banned from this. It was a museum, and they banned us. We shot, and then we were like, well, we'll finish on Monday. And so we come back, and they literally like, y'all cannot come back in here. Because it was like a 17 or 18-year-old girl who was like interning, like was watching us for them, and she told them about the language, and then it was a sex scene with the clothes on. The characters had their clothes on, and then it was like, you all can't come back. And so we called Dan. We were like, Dan, they locked us out the museum, and so we had to shoot like the outside scenes. It was like crazy. It was yeah. Well, and I was like, my gosh, but yeah.
I think well, speaking of language,
but you have to deal with that sometimes when you're dealing with certain subject matters and.
Well, one of the things I think, speaking of that, I think this was probably right around the time when I also shortly after I saw you on the back of a bus. I mean, literally like on a billboard on a bus with you in a dress with your hair flailing on the side. I was like, holy crap, that's Caleb on the side of a bus. And that was for Portland.
That was Portland, but Portland is a town that supports performance art. Like, they love performance art. Like, the whole town comes out. Yeah. And I remember them saying they were going to put me on a bus. And I was like, oh, really? I said, oh, that's cool. And I remember one day, I came out of somebody's house, one of the musicians that I was working with, and then I went by on a bus. And I was like, oh, my gosh, it's like crazy. But they're, like, really into performance art and, like, all the wild, crazy stuff that performance art represents.
But you actually did an animation there.
I did animation.
Yeah. So.
Well, they asked me if it was anything that I wanted to do that I hadn't done. And because I do all the voices for the characters and people are like lip syncing, I was like, well, I want to try to do an animation for this character, Katanya, because people are always telling me ever since grad school, maybe I should do an animation. But I like the fact that the animated voices was coming out of the real people. And so I was like, well, maybe I should do an episode of Conversations with the Children as an animation. And so they paired me with Like a House, and Like a House does the Eminem commercials.
Yeah.
And they also did the PJs, which a lot of people have a problem with, but
Well,
but
actually,
that's what they do.
Well,
And it was, but yeah.
Yeah.
And so I worked with them. I mean, you know, people have issues with the PJs and some of the subject matter.
well, if they had issues with that, and if they had issues with the language of this, I think the project you did in Portland was even beyond a lot of that.
Yeah, I think I was willing to have a dialogue because they wasn't necessarily offended. Like I met with all the directors at the table, and we had a dialogue about like what I wanted to do and that sort of thing. And so it was in the context of. But a lot of times when I get to the PJ things, people get like that often, but but you know.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at that Portland. Let's take a look at that animation. It's the pica one, and maybe you want to go into a specific, any particular time that you want to show it. Should we scroll forward because it's a relatively long clip.
Maybe like the first 2 minutes, because you can see Katanya and then.
Katanya?
Big Feet Freddy.
Are you okay?
No. I can't get over what happened to Lil and Myron.
It's not your fault.
I was there. I was there.
You didn't do a thing, though.
You think people would get upset if I made work about it?
You are an artist. If they do, remember, you got me. I got your back.
Baby love, don't be hurt. I am here to give you love.
Hey, I've been checking you out for a while now.
Myron, I don't go that way.
Oh, I thought.
I just be looking.
You sure? I felt like
I got a girl.
I could have sworn.
I think you're cool. You know, my sister loves you. She talks about you all the time. So when I saw you,
I get it. You was just looking.
yeah, I don't have nothing against gay people. So if you see me, holler at me. A friend of my sister is a friend of mine.
Could he jump like?
Yeah, let's forward to what minute would you like to forward to?
Maybe like 3. Keep going. Okay, around about. Go back. Okay, right here.
Lil? As in B's brother?
Yes.
What? I did not know he went that way.
Me neither until
Why you upset? He cute.
we got real freaky. Let's just say he don't wash his ass. My stomach's still turning. I can still taste it in my mouth.
B, I did not know your brother liked boys. Right? Yes. Myron told me him and Lil messed around. He also said Lil don't know how to wash his ass. That is not funny. Why you putting them out there like that? Please, it is not that serious.
I think let's hold off on the video. I think we're because we want to get to some questions from you folks too in a little bit. But I have to ask you, because I remember very early on. I think it was maybe our first conversation, maybe our second conversation. You said to me, "I want to make soap operas," and I was thinking, well, yeah, but that's not usually what most people come to graduate school to study art for. But I said, okay, you want to make soap operas? That's cool. We'll work around it. We'll work with it. We'll see what comes out. And then, of course, now, not even 10 years later, or 10 years later, you end up on General Hospital as a character that they created based on you that you played yourself. So Caleb
Yeah.
Ishmael. So I want you to talk about like when that moment when you found out you were going to be a character or you were going to be on General Hospital.
Yeah, James Franco attended one of my lectures at Columbia. He heard me talk, and then we met down in Miami, and he was like, I want you to be on General Hospital with me, and I was like, okay, but I didn't really believe him at the time, and so I was like, okay, and then some months passed. I remember, it was so weird. It was the strangest thing. We were supposed to do a radio show, and so the radio show didn't happen. And then he sent me an email because they had a shoot that ran over. He was like, the producer said yes to you being on General Hospital. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be on General Hospital. And I started screaming, like not screaming, but I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be on General Hospital. But I was in my apartment, like by myself. I was like, oh my gosh, be on General Hospital. And then I was like, I couldn't believe it. And so I couldn't believe it, but then, it was weird, like a couple hours later, I started getting emails and like phone calls, text messages. It was like, call home, you need to call home. And so I called home, it was a snowstorm in New York, and it was like, your mother been rushed to the hospital, and my mother almost died of congestion heart failure. So I remember being told I was gonna be on General Hospital, being really happy, and then being stuck in New York for a snowstorm. My mother was in the hospital. So it was like, at the same time, it was just the weirdest, crazy moment.
Wow.
And so my mother pulled through, and she got to see me be on General Hospital.
That's pretty great.
It was wild.
Now you're saying that the producer on All My Children, or was it Guiding Light?
Yeah, the producer on Guiding Light, when I was in high school, is a producer on General Hospital now.
Yeah.
And so I had like all these long conversations about when I was in high school watching Guiding Light. And she knew everything I was talking about. So.
Well, let's take a look at that, because I think this is, and then it ended up at the Mocha.
If it plays, but this was shot on location at the Mocha, and I'm doing a cover of Mad
Firefox.
World. And this is like behind the scene footage.
And action, launch.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I've been asked to perform a very special number.
And I couldn't show my legs on daytime TV.
Why was that?
They say I couldn't.
Still chasing that dream, identifying a road that leads to
Okay, you know what? At this time, why don't we get some questions from the audience? Folks, there's going to be a microphone being passed around, and because we are live streaming this, so just hold off until the microphone gets to you before you start your questions. So who's going to start? Any questions that would...
Hi, my name is Tiffany. Thank you so much for being here. I was in New York when you had a showing at one of the museums there, and I couldn't get there, so I'm very happy to be here. My question for you is, with the likely demise of the soap opera as a genre, how do you think that will influence your work in future? And personally, how do you feel about that?
Personally, I remember when Guiding Light got canceled like 2 or 3 years ago. And my aunt called me, and she was like, I want to see how you doing. Because, no, she was like, because I lost the soap before. She was like, I was into love. No, she was like, I was into Love of Life, like the same way you're into Guiding Light. And for a while, I would wake up at 10 o'clock in the daytime and had to figure out what to do with myself. I think I know the genre well enough and historically enough that I can still make my own work related to the soap opera. Also do feel, because they're gonna put All My Children and One Life to Live online full time, I think it's similar to when Guiding Light went from the radio to television. I believe the soap operas will be more liberated online. Now, if they will get the same advertising dollars, that part I don't know. So I think it's going to be in flux for a minute.
Hi, so my name is Carla, and I just wanted to tell you how much I love you. I first was introduced to your work when you came to MIT, where I was at the time, in a collection that was basically focused on the idea of gender. And do you remember that? Do you remember your work being part of that, or at the List Visual Arts Center?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So my question is, as an African-American artist, I believe you were the only one that was there. What are sort of the... Do you feel that there's sort of like an interesting sort of dimension when you think about like gender, race, and the avenue which you've decided to express yourself? Anyway, just curious.
You asked me what now? What?
I have like a million questions. I'm trying to like condense them. Okay, so basically, when I saw your work for the first time, it was in an avenue that was focused on gender. And for an African American woman, I was like, oh my gosh, he's so me. Like that's what I saw in you and your work.
You?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I know like I think like Lau Asher Harris is another African American artist like who I was influenced by. So he's doing stuff with gender. I think because if you feel like I'm you, it's because I grew up primarily hanging around all girls, and I was raised by women in my family. I do have male cousins that I played with, but I was the only guy around a bunch of girls, so I kind of understood them through them trusting me. And so I think I felt a strong connection like with them and with some of the stuff. I'm not going to say I'm a woman, but like...
No. I completely... And the thing is, like, for me, when I saw your work, you were like one of the only persons of color in that show. And when I saw your work, it really, for me, sort of transposed gender. Mm-hmm. I didn't see like, okay, this is a man who is playing a million different parts. I saw you as an artist very succinctly, sort of going into these characters. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the show was about gender, it was interesting for me because, I saw myself in all your... Anyway, and...
Well, it's a piece of me in all of my characters, and I also deal with like stereotypes, but I take the stereotype and match it with the archetype and something in myself. And also, our program was set up, a 3-year program, so I spent a year and a half developing the characters and also developing mannerisms for each character so they could be like distinctly defined. So I did spend a lot of time setting the stage, like with all my children, and all of those.
Churns.
So, and also they told us we couldn't graduate if the work wasn't about us, so I did include stuff from like family history that I thought related to African American culture and also like pop culture. So I put all of those things in my first developed piece, I should say, and then I kept, and because it was a soap opera, I continued to explore the characters.
But I just want to say, like, you as an artist, like, I did not see gender, I did not see race, I saw you. And it very much resonated with me.
Cool, thank you.
As a black woman, watching the soaps, pretending I was Alexis Carrington. So, love you.
Thank you, love you too, thank you. Thank you.
Do you have a few other questions?
Hi, I enjoyed watching the animation portion of that last clip, and it looked fairly advanced, and it sounded like you were saying that was your first big effort with it. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how it came to be and what you've done or what you will do in the future with more animation.
It was a conversation with the production company, because my work was lo-fi, that we can't make too big of a jump in terms of it being slick. So we did have a conversation about that, I basically took my drawings to the animation house and we sat down and we talked about different techniques, and then we just FTP'd each other like back and forth of what I thought of this and what I thought of that. I did all the voices myself and sent them the voices, and they tweaked the voices. And in terms of where I'm gonna go, we were talking about doing another piece, but that piece was underwritten. And so then when I got the real budget, it was like $30,000. And I don't know how we got that one done. But I think they paid for that because it was a nonprofit institution. So they're really expensive. So,
yeah.
So I have some scripts written, but because the work is an additional $5, will collectors pay the money for it, for people to recoup their money, for the people that pays for it to get produced. So it's an economical thing. I did buy an animation program, so I'm trying to teach myself to animate, but you might have to wait another 3 or 4 years. 3 or 4 years. I mean, I do have an animation program, but I don't know if I can get the animation to look like that. So I'm thinking about it. So I have to keep you posted, but I am thinking about it.
I mean, that's a pretty sophisticated software.
Yeah, exactly, and it's a
company.
it's a monetary thing.
Yeah. Do we have a couple more questions?
Hello, Caleb. How you doing? I'm Chukwuma. I had a question concerning language, and well, it's 2 questions, but kind of overlapped, because I kind of noticed a bit of a lateral connection with artists like Hennessy Youngman or Ryan Trade-Carton, who embrace either creating an entire new language or vernacular language as like a mode to like address pertinent issues. And I wanted to ask you like about your like awareness of these other artists exploring that and how it works for you. Ryan Trade-Carton and Hennessy Youngman.
Who was the last one?
Hennessy Youngman or Jason Musan, I'm sorry.
I don't know if I know the Hennessy, but I know Ryan.
Yeah, Hennessy was just at Skowhegan this summer.
Okay.
And him and Wanda were going to be doing some things together.
Okay. I just know Ryan from around, so I'm aware, but I don't know the other artists. And as far as like my work exploring language, I was using the Southern vernacular dialect that was particularly related to my small town, because in the South, we can kind of tell when we're from different places, based on the vernacular. And so for me, it was a bunch of conversations where I pre-recorded all the dialogue, and then I cast my friends in different races to lip sync to my voice. And so early on, I was exploring language from the idea that people sound like the environment they're born in and are raised in, and it doesn't have anything to do with the skin color. It's really about the culture. So that's my take on the language and dealing with the ideas of race and culture. And so, am I creating a new language? I don't know. Maybe mixing different genres, which we're taught in screenwriting. You take some from this genre and some from that genre. And yeah, and I was just doing the pitch modulations to help assist me in defining the sound of the characters' voices. And I also changed the pitch of my own voice, and so for me, it's like a combination of things. But as I heard another artist say, I'm aware of my contemporaries, but I don't spend too much time studying and trying to figure out everything that they're up to, but I am aware of most of my contemporaries. Most of my peers, but again, but I never had a dialogue with Ryan though. But I mean, I see him at parties and stuff like that. And the other guy, I don't know. The other guy I don't know at all.
Well, a lot of your contemporaries are upstairs in the show right here, and a lot of your the cohort of.
Oh yeah, exactly. So yeah. And I think in that circle, I'm pretty much the one doing that type of work. You know what I mean? So it's like, We almost all have our area or our space.
Do you have a couple more questions? Or?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We only have time for one more question.
Okay.
We want to make sure to leave enough time for Caleb's performance.
All right. Yeah, so don't go away, folks. We got some good stuff for you.
Hi, Caleb. I saw your work down in North Carolina, and
was that the 30 Americans too?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I recall Shirley Caesar, the gospel singer Shirley Caesar, as a backdrop. And I'm from North Carolina. I'm very familiar with her music, and I thought it was hilarious that you used her as a backdrop. And I was wondering, what was the rationale behind using her music?
One rationale is because gospel music was recorded in like a more lo-fi way back then. So sound-wise, I thought it matched. But I also wanted to use Catania because it was like the blonde hair and the beard. Because we were at some point we were studying like grotesque. I don't know if it was at USF or like once I got out of school. So I wanted to show like this character that sort of had like a not, beautiful type look, but also explore her sexuality and spirituality through the gospel music and her talking to God to sort of force the viewer to look past the visual and get into like the spirit of the character. And so I also thought the gospel music helped assist in that. At least I was hoping it did. And also dealing with the anxieties of what artists go through when they're preparing for a show. Like there's real anxiety. And so to try to mind those things.
All right. Well, thank you, Caleb.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's get the one video.
You ain't heard about Tony? Why he don't call us a large ass no more? I'm talking about the Tony that got Jennifer Hudson and Fantasia ass hard and screaming. He don't want you. He with somebody else right now. He is so damn negative. I'm just telling you the truth. Remember Jody, the candy liquor? Yeah. Baby, he don't call me either. What? And guess what? What? I ain't had none in 6 damn weeks, and I'm tired of sleeping, and I ain't got time to talk to you about a piece of dick you had 2 weeks ago. Why you getting all mad? You say you gonna be my friend. You woke me up out my damn sleep, talking about a man you had to beg to come lay up with you. You need to stop begging these damn men to come lay up with you. Fuck you. No, fuck you, and stop calling me so damn late at night, waking me up. Shit. That man don't want you. Bye. I get blue every time I think of you. I get sad. You were all I had. Why in the hell did I turn to you? Knowing damn well you'll make me go to jail. Ooh, police, get this motherfucker out my face. 220, I'm about to face. 2 minutes ago, I was through. I am a real mad. Some good shit I thought I had. Now I'm cussing, screaming. I yell. I know I'm going to hell. Get this motherfucker out my face. I'm about to face. Motherfucker, I'm about to catch that case. I'm about to face. I need a cheap flight to Honolulu. I don't win upside this motherfucker head. Why somebody else giving head? I can't take it, can't take it. I ain't gonna stay here and try to fake it. Hey, police, get this motherfucker out my face. Motherfucker, police, I'm about to catch the case. I'm about to catch that case. Catch the case. I'm about to face. Get this motherfucker out my face. 220, I'm about to face. Catch that case. I'm about to catch that case. 220, I'm about to face. She tears you down, darling. Says you're nothing at all. But I'll pick you up, darling, when she lets you fall. You're like a diamond, but she treats you like glass. Yeah, you beg her to love you. Me, you don't ask. If I was your woman, if I were your woman, if I was your woman, here's what I do. I'll never know, stop loving you. Life is so crazy and love is unkind. Because she came first, darling, when she hang on your mind. You're a part of me, and you don't even know it. I'm what you need, but I'm too afraid to show it. If I was your woman, if I were your woman, if I was your woman, here's what I do. I'll never know, stop loving you. If I were your woman, I legally marry you. I'll marry you. Loving you, I won't stop, and I'll drop it like it's hot. Loving you, I won't stop. I just won't stop. Loving you, I won't stop. I do. I'll never know, stop loving you. Baby love, I know I was wrong. I expressed myself in the wrong damn song. Don't get me wrong, I believe in love. Ooh, however, I believe in a spirit-filled fuck. Can't you feel it moving? The spirit, my nature's rising. The spirit, I know it's over there too. The spirit, my spirit, I love you. The spirit, baby, it's soothing. The spirit, so warm down in my soul. The spirit, just one touch of you. The spirit, your spirit, I love you. The spirit. Many times in my life, I had to laugh and stop the crying. So many times in my life, I had to smile, I was lying. Many times in my life, I had to pretend to love you, while all the time I was saying to myself, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. I don't need this abuse. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. Go to hell too. Some say that look in my eyes a little sexy. Others say it represents wickedness, sneakiness, a potential mess. Now I partially agree, but I don't act out every thought you see. Sometimes when you piss me off, I retreat, evilness in my brain reads, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, go to hell too, fuck you, I don't need this abuse, fuck you, kiss my ass too. These evil thoughts cause me to live in hell, so I turned them off, so I won't tell you off. My niceness kicks in, I seem bipolar then, conflicted within myself, the truth still prevails. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, go to hell too. Fuck you, I don't need this abuse. Fuck you, kiss my ass too. Fuck you.
Right there.
The spirit, the spirit, the spirit, the spirit, just one task for the spirit, the spirit.
One more song. Okay, go back. Wow. Okay, right there. So how are y'all doing? We got one more. And the video playing in the background. This video that I took, not this video, but the video you're gonna hear for the last song I'm gonna perform is a video taken from the opera I did in San Francisco. Thank you. So hope you all enjoyed the evening. And thank you for coming out. I really, really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. So, and I hope you all know I wasn't telling you all, I wasn't saying fuck you to you all, but I have had some situations in my life where that song and those words did apply. Okay, so here we go. Here we go.
I cried all the tears I thought I could cry. I prayed all the prayers I thought I could pray. I wished upon a star, my soul was my falling star. Now I weep, Lord, my soul to keep. Why so much pain? me my shell is made of steel. I look inside myself, all I see is a chest full of tears. A chest, a chest, a chest full of tears. Why so much heartache? Why, oh why? Why? You woke me up this morning as I started on my way. It fled into proportions. My life is a mess. I'm down for the count. Tell me who's got my back. The Lord up above has never failed me yet. Why so much pain? Why so much heartache? Why, oh why? Why, oh why? Somebody tell me why. Ooh, why so much? Why so much heartache? I got a chest full of tears. I got a chest, ooh, a chest, y'all, a chest full of tears.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out.
Wow. Thank you, Caleb. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. You can take that off your bucket list. Good night.